Hello, this is Writers at Work, a podcast for readers and writers about the joys, heartaches, challenges, and satisfaction of the creative writing process. I'm your host, Jim Fusilli. Our guest today on Writers at Work is George Pelecanos, a writer who is widely acknowledged and, to my mind, underappreciated. I never miss an opportunity to check in with George to see what he's up to. Readers first met George 3 decades ago via his crime novels set in his native Washington, D.C., as his characters emerged from vividly detailed settings, rich with ambiance and music, that were generally far, far from the corridors of political power. In 2002, George joined the writers' team of HBO's The Wire at the invitation of David Simon, its showrunner and primary writer. A year later, he was promoted to producer and wrote several episodes with Simon. A career in TV ensued, with work on The Wire, Pacific, Treme, The Deuce, and We Own This City, all on HBO. His DC Noir, also on HBO, was his project as writer, producer, and director. While writing for TV, George continued with his crime novels. Earlier this year, George published Buster, a Dog, a novella that tells a gritty crime story through the eyes of a dog, specifically a boxer. Also, his Owning Up featured 4 novellas linked by environment and theme. Given the amount of quality work he's done and doing, I relish the chance to find out what's next. George Pelecanos, welcome to Writers at Work.
Thanks, Jim.
George, I'd like to get a sense of how you manage your career now. Not in terms of time, but in terms of your ideas. How do you decide where you want to invest them? Novels, short fiction, TV project?
Yeah, well, currently, I'm under contract to HBO, and so I have an obligation there to bring them properties and ideas and that kind of thing, and to develop things. And just on the honor tip, I should stay on that. I feel like I should stay on that because I'm being paid well to do that. But I'm always thinking about books and what I'm going to write in the future, because the bigger plan is, I'm nearing the end of my career in film and television, but I want to continue to write books, not to be morbid, but until my death. That's
Right,
the plan. I'm not going to retire. Um,
right.
so right now I'm just trying to set my family up and still stay on the ball in terms of my fiction.
Yeah. It's are you leaving TV by choice, or is it just the way things go?
Well, I'm not going to be leaving for a couple more years at least. But I'm always the oldest guy in the room now, and I'd always hoped to know when it was time to get off the stage,
Right.
and so there it is.
That's an honorable thing, George. We've witnessed in sports and in the arts, I guess in public life too, people sticking around just past their due date.
Yeah.
Yeah. Listen, before we move ahead, I wanted to go back to the 1990s. I found out something about you a couple days ago, that you were involved in the distribution of John Woo's The Killers and worked for a distribution company for almost 10 years. At the same time, you were trying to establish yourself as a novelist. What was life like back then for you?
Well, it was pretty hectic. My wife and I had 3 children in the '90s. We adopted our kids; they were all infants, and then I had this full-time job downtown, which was a big learning curve for me because it was my first job in the movie business. I went there to promote The Killer, which I'd seen in a film festival, and then I read in the trades that Jim and Ted Pettis from Circle Films had bought it for distribution. I wrote them a letter and I got in. I had an interview and they let me in. So I worked there for 9 years while I was writing a book a year, which meant that, in addition to having a full-time job, my wife and I raising 3 little kids, I would get up very early in the morning and I'd write, and then I'd come home at night and I'd write. And I published a book every year during that 9 year period
Yeah.
in that way.
The I learned probably later than I should have that nobody has time to write a novel when their career is starting. You've just got to find time to steal away from other things. And I guess that was the case for you, yes?
Yeah, so you got to sit down behind the desk and work. And I've always been really regimented about my work schedule as far as writing goes. To this day, I still maintain a morning session, a long morning session, into the afternoon, early afternoon. Then lunch, and then after lunch, I do something physical. I ride my bike, or if I'm down by the water, I kayak or something like that. And then I come back at night and I rewrite what I did in the morning, and so that I'm ready to go forward the next day. And I've always done that from the beginning.
How long?
You,
I'm
go ahead.
sorry. No, no,
No,
please, George, go ahead. I was going to ask you how long it took you to write A Firing Offense, your first novel.
well, that took a while because I didn't know what I was doing. And I'd never written anything before. I'd never even written a short story. I just I had the crazy idea that I could do it, you know, and it was my goal to do it. I mean, once I got turned on to books in college by a professor, Charles Mish, specifically crime novels. I took a crime fiction class. That was my goal, was to be a crime fiction novelist. But I had a lot of catching up to do. So in my 20s, I worked a lot of jobs. People could call them blue collar jobs, but it wasn't that difficult. I was working in restaurants and bars and that kind of thing, selling women's shoes and reading voraciously, trying to figure this thing out. But when I got ready to do it, I think I was 31 when I wrote my first book. It took me a while because, number one, I was writing in longhand and notebooks, and I wrote the book twice that way. And then I scraped up enough money to get a word processor, and I wrote it a third time. Um, and I sent it away to New York blind. I sent it to St. Martin's Press. I had a copy of the Writer's Market. I saw that they published a lot of mysteries, and I only sent it to one publisher because they all say no simultaneous submissions. Which, if your listeners are out there, that's not true. What you want to do is get more than one person interested, because then your price goes up. But anyways, and I waited for a year to hear back from them. In the meantime, I started another book, which was my second novel, Nick's Trip. Um, anyway, the manuscript landed on the slush pile at the feet of a young editor named Gordon Van Gelder, and he got what I was doing. I was writing punk rock detective novels. Um, and it was very fortuitous that it landed at his desk, because I'm pretty convinced that had it gone somewhere else to maybe an older editor or somebody who didn't really understand the references, I never would have been published.
Uh, did you in the three drafts that you did, the two by longhand and the one by word processor, did you have a sense that you were getting better, or that you were moving toward your objective?
I think the book was getting better. Um, I haven't read that book in a long time. I probably haven't cracked it open in 20 years. I'm sort of apprehensive to look at it, um, because I think as a whole, I've gotten better as a writer, and I might not like what I read um, when I go back to it, but that's the goal, Jim, is to get better as a writer. It's always the goal. It's the next book I write, I want it to be better than the last one I wrote, because that's what fuels your ambition.
Yeah, the it also speaks to the value of self-editing and being willing to go into a draft and tear it up if you have to.
Yeah, I mean, look, I wasn't under contract. I didn't have any pressure at all. The only pressure was to write what I thought was a good book, and actually, to broaden it out a little bit, I was at St. Martin's for 5 books, and um, I was always with Gordon Van Gelder. He made me a better writer. Um, St. Martin's was not promoting the books at all. Had I stayed there, I think my career would have been over eventually. But those 5 books were a learning ground for me, and also an opportunity to try different things without somebody looking over my shoulder and saying, "Hey, look, we're paying you X amount of dollars. You got to write something more commercial." Um, it was it was a really great way to grow myself as a writer and to get published at the same time.
Do you remember, George, when you admitted to yourself that you were a writer?
Yeah, I think I think it took me a few books. I didn't feel like a fraud or anything. It's just that I didn't feel like I was getting to where I wanted to get. Not in terms of my career, but in terms of the writing. And my fifth novel was a book called The Big Blowdown, which most people don't know about. It was buried also, but that's where I think I really broke out artistically. It was a big epic, um, kind of my Once Upon a Time in DC, where you're introduced to these kids in the late 20s, they're children, and then it goes to the war years and what happens to all of them in the post-war years of 1946 to 1949. Um, that's where I really felt like this is happening now.
Yeah. Did anybody say to you you're a writer? And
Well,
I tell you, because I was at the Wall Street Journal. I was at a meeting, and somebody was looking over my copy, and they said, "Well, I don't need to tell you that you're a writer." And I got such a thrill from hearing somebody else say it, even though I suppose I had a sense that it was true, but just to hear someone else validate it, I guess that's the point I'm making. I don't know.
yeah, there were some teachers when I was growing up who said, you're a pretty good writer, like you ought to pursue it. But I had no idea how to do that, and I think you probably know that my base was movies. I wanted to be a filmmaker, and I wanted to write and direct movies. Um, Most of my influence comes from movies I saw as a child in the '60s and then as a teenager in the '70s, which is a really good thing because it was the golden age of film. And specifically, my dad and I used to go to the movies a lot together. And, I like the usual stuff, the John Sturges films, Magnificent Seven, Great Escape, Robert Aldrich, The Dirty Dozen, Leone. But when he took me to see The Wild Bunch in 1969 at the Allen Theater on New Hampshire Avenue, when I walked out of there, I knew what I wanted to do with my life. That was the most influential piece of art in my life, above all, above books, above anything, was Peckinpah's The Wild Bunch.
Wild. You published a novel a year. You mentioned this earlier, from 1992 to 2002, and then you were involved with The Wire. Um, had you and David Simon been talking about some level of involvement, or did an invitation come out of the blue, or how exactly did you agree to work with him?
Yeah, well, it didn't exactly come out of the blue because his girlfriend at the time, who later became his wife, the writer Laura Lippman, um, knew me a little bit, and she handed one of my books to him. It was The Sweet Forever, which was a very deep urban novel, urban crime novel that was similar to what he was doing in Baltimore. Um, he had done The Corner at that point, which was excellent work. And she said, "Read this guy." So I saw him at a funeral. I'd only met him once before, even though we went to the University of Maryland together, but we traveled in different circles. And he says, "Ride with me on the way to the Shiva." We're riding in a car, and he says, "I just saw the show to HBO. It's about cops and drug dealers." He didn't. aggrandize it or blow it up and say, it's about America or anything like that. He just said cops and drug dealers. Do you want to write an episode for me in the first season? I said, yeah, I'm in. I'll try it. Um, I was in France on a book tour. I remember I was in Paris and I had a lot of anxiety because I had to come back and write the screenplay and I'd never done that before. Um, but I came back and he sat with me and he showed me the beat sheet and um, we talked about the scenes and I wrote it. And it turned out to be a sort of a infamous episode because it's not a spoiler at this point, but it's the one where Wallace, played by Michael B. Jordan, is killed by his friends. And after that, I got invited to be a bigger part of the show, and I became a producer. And very deliberately, I wanted to learn that part of the business because I wanted to have another gun in my arsenal. Basically, you never know. As a writer, you don't even know if you might fall down the stairs and hit your head or something, and you can't write anymore. I wanted to know how to do something else, and they allowed me to be on set every day from call to wrap and learn everything I could. And eventually, I learned how to be a producer on set.
Did you adapt to the new medium quickly? Did you have a sense of how you needed to alter your way of approaching story?
Yeah, I learned a lot. I mean, contrary to some popular belief, is that screenwriting is easy because it's not a novel. And trust me, I've crossed paths with novelists who've come into our rooms and said, "This is going to be easy," and they didn't make it. They didn't last because it's not easy. I mean, we sweat as much blood writing scripts as we do writing novels. Um, and actually, it's a little bit more of a challenge because you can't go to backstory or you can't go to what is in the character's head. It has to be, you have to write what's going to end up on screen, which is action and dialogue, and still convey the same amount of emotion. Um, so yeah, I adapted to it. And I also liked, a lot of novelists just don't even like the process. They don't like being on set. Um, they don't like being in the writer's room because there's a lot of fireworks in the writer's room and people being critical of your work and so on. I embraced all of that. And I really like producing. I like being on set every day. It's a new experience every day. You're learning something every day. And I like the camaraderie of it, the idea that we're all here together making this thing, like I consider the crew to be artists, just artists in the same way that writers or directors are. Um, and we're making this art together.
George, in your novels, there are two I've always lived out of me. One is the absolute control of the environment, your and your use of setting and the interaction between character and setting. Um, and I suppose that is a skill set that adapts to the visual medium. Yes?
Yeah, I think so. It's very detail oriented. Um, if you read one of my scripts, they read like novels. There's not a lot of white space that you see in the typical Hollywood script. Um, when someone walks into the room, everything is described, and the cars, of course, are described, and that carries over into when I'm show running. I'm out on the street looking at every car, checking every picture car, or I go into the holding area and I look at all the extras. I walk down the line and I look at everybody and what they're wearing, especially if we're doing a period show like the Deuce,
Right.
the 70s in New York. Um, I want to make sure it's right because I see a lot of mistakes when I'm watching other shows. And a lot of it has to do with my age, like I alluded to earlier. I'm usually the oldest guy on the production. So um, not many people working on the show remember the 70s. They weren't there,
Yeah.
but I remember it much much clearer than I do, last week.
We thinking of when you and I first met, I think I think Laura actually introduced us, but I remember wanting to talk to you about the music in your books. I thought you used music really well, and not always the most popular tunes of the day. You define your characters in some way by their interesting taste in music. As a producer, do you jump in and recommend music for your shows?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's kind of the bonus of being in charge, which I eventually became in charge. I'll tell you, my proudest moment is on the Deuce, the first season. We had Curtis Mayfield's "If There's Hell Below, We're All Gonna Go" as the title music, which is, if you could see my office right now, the wall behind my laptop, it has a huge photograph of Curtis Mayfield, my idol,
Yeah, yeah,
Um, and then in the I guess it was second season, when Maggie Gyllenhaal's as Candy's walking down the street, and you hear the music in the background. She walks into a club, and the music comes up, and it's Barry White's "Let the Music Play." This proto disco track from his greatest record, I think, that's the title track. So I've been pushing my music into these shows for as long as I have been able to. Yeah.
yeah. That's such a bonus. That's wonderful. Uh, I noticed that you published 6 novels during the years you were with The Wire.
Mm.
Um, so by then you already were accustomed to working 18-hour days, I imagine. But what was the challenge of doing both? Did TV writing affect your novels? I mean, you're doing two heavy things at the same time. How did that work for you?
I think it went both ways. I mean, I brought um, or I proposed some characters on The Wire that were a result of some of the research I had been doing for my novels. Um, where it sort of hit a snag was when I wrote The Night Gardener. Um, I had just gotten a big contract, and I felt like I had to deliver something that was more epic and bigger. And that was a tough book to write, because I was working on The Wire season 4, and I was writing that book. Um, and I had to step back a little bit from The Wire just to finish the book. And I accomplished it. I wrote that book, and it's a book I'm proud of, but it did strain things quite a bit in terms of my work on television.
Yeah. I imagine that you've pitched a lot of ideas over the years that weren't picked up. What happens to those ideas?
Well, you end up using some stuff in your fiction, but unfortunately, a lot of those ideas just they go adrift, and you have to sort of get used to that when you work in television. And most of the stuff you write isn't going to get made, and it can make you jaded if you let it make you jaded. But I still try to do all the research, and I try to make it um, as good as it can be, even in the back of my mind, knowing that it's probably not going to get picked up. Um, that's the business, man. You know.
Yeah, I just think that nothing goes to waste. I was just wondering if you know that your idea is good. You know it would have worked. You're not going to be given the opportunity to do it, but you have this outlet of novels, and you have a ready readership. I guess you're not the "I'll show them" type of person, huh?
No, I'm not. I'm not that guy.
Okay. Your novel, "The Man Who Came Uptown," was published in 2018, and I may be reading too much into this, but the one theme of that book is that how lives are enriched by books. And the Washington Post called it a book about books. Were you reminding us that you're first and foremost a novelist?
No, I was just you hit it closer the first time. Is It was just a love letter to reading and books. Um, I had been doing a lot of writing programs in prisons and jails, most most often down at the DC jail, which is our Rikers Island. It's the holding jail. And and I got inspired by those guys that I work with. They they had a love of books. They were voracious readers, and books in some ways had impacted their lives in a positive way. And then I met this librarian down there, and a woman named Danielle, who at the time was taking books on a cart to the various cell blocks every day, and because there was no physical library there, and she would, when she got to know the inmates, she would have book recommendations that she would put on the cart and say, "Here, check out this guy Elmore Leonard." You know what I mean? I think you'll really like him, that kind of thing. And I just felt like I had to write about it. It was so inspirational. Um, and books changed my life, man. I mean,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
I I, uh, I wasn't on any success track. That's for damn sure. Until I started reading and I started dreaming a little bit.
yeah. An amazing transportive experience, just picking up a book when you're unaware of what is going to happen when you turn to page one. And
Well, it's like I say in that novel, like a guy in a cell that can open up a book at night and all of a sudden he's out on horseback on the prairie, with the wide open sky, uh, or to quote A.B. Guthrie, the big sky above, and all of a sudden he's not locked up anymore. That cell door is open. He's free.
yeah. George, the novellas that you published this year,
Mhm.
why the shorter form?
Well, I kind of like it. I've always liked it. I mean, I think the Jim Harrison books that are novellas, three novellas in each book are his best books to me. Um, I realize it's not a huge commercial undertaking, but these were four stories that I wanted to write, and I didn't think they were appropriate for novels. Um, and so I just did it. They were knocking on the door, and I had that um, the pandemic opportunity where I was off of work, off of television work and movie work, and I wrote them in the course of a year. Um, and one of them was originally intended to be a novel, but I didn't think it was going to work as one. So that one that's set in 1919 to 1923. So I figured out a way to that one's called Knickerbocker. I figured out a way to make it to frame it in a way that it would work as a novella. Um, One of the stories, the No Knock, is about something that I wanted to write for 15 years, about something that happened in my family, a no knock warrant that was executed on my house, um, 15 years ago. And, and I wanted to write about that because these no knock warrants, which are really home invasions, can, um, really impact a family. And of course, there's been a lot of fatalities, not just people shot who were, innocent. The police went to the wrong address or something like that. Um, Police have also been killed. There's been police fatalities too. So, I wanted to tell that story, but the first 10 pages of that novella are exactly what happened to my family that
Oh
day.
my, wow.
Um, my son committed a crime. I never say he made a mistake. He committed a crime, and the police broke down our door and put everybody down, handcuffs on the floor, and pointed guns at my 12-year-old daughter and my middle-aged wife, live guns, and basically, ripped through my house. So that's something but I needed permission from my family to write about it. And of course, my son, my oldest son, the one who was involved in the crime, is a director now. He's in the Directors Guild and he's doing great. Um, so there was that. Um, yeah.
Will you film this? Do you think you'll bring it to film?
No, I don't think so. I think it's appropriate as a as a written novella. I don't think it's the beginning is cinematic, but this is one of those stories where you really got to go into the psychological complexity of the characters, and which would be very difficult to film.
Yeah. The novella is an interesting form, isn't it? I recall somebody asked Philip Roth why he was writing novellas, and he said he didn't have the stamina to do novels. But I think that if you read those the late Roth, you can see the work that's in them. Just because they're shorter doesn't mean they're easier.
That's right.
You
And
know,
as I said earlier, I mean, everything you write, you better be serious about it and bear down on it. I also published a novella called Buster a Dog this year, a
right.
standalone, which is about a dog in DC from his days as a puppy to his final days, and all of his various owners, starting with a loving family in the projects. And it's written in the voice of the dog. It's a very unusual book. Um, so yeah, I mean, I'm just doing what I want now.
I did want to ask you about the the dog book, the boxer book. Are you a dog person?
Yeah, we've owned a lot of dogs since my childhood, and we had two adopted dogs that we put down during the pandemic. But it's very the reason we don't own a dog now is because it's so hard to say goodbye to them.
Oh man,
Um,
George, tell me.
yeah,
It's been 10 years since our dog died, and I can't bring myself to have another.
yeah, you're as haunted by their passing as you are by your loved ones. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah, yeah. So I've taken a roundabout way to get to where I wanted to go, which is what are you up to now?
I'm developing a couple things for HBO, which means a lot of research and some writing, um, and hopefully something will go. Um, right now, the last few weeks, I've been working with the homicide division in DC and shadowing them, and that's about all I can say about what I'm working on. But yeah, I'm always working on something and thinking about my next book.
And do you have something on? Do you have a draft down for the next book, or
No,
you're
no, no. I'm
still?
just thinking,
Yeah,
just thinking at
yeah.
this point. Yeah.
Well, listen, George, I'm a big fan. I think I've told you that myself, and it's so good to hear that um, you've got a life plan revolving around how to do quality work. That's wonderful.
Speaking of that, because you never do this, I want to give a shout out to your book, your latest book, The Price You Pay. I thought it was really, really excellent, and that was good work, man. Seriously.
Oh, thank you, George. That means a lot. Believe me, you've always had a generous spirit, and I do appreciate it.
Okay, well, thanks for talking to me. It's always a
Yeah, yeah,
discussion.
yeah. Thanks for joining us at Writers at Work, George. You take care, huh?
Okay, you too.
Okay, bye bye.
Bye.
Writers at Work is a production of Bliss Publications. Erin Mitchell is our producer. Music is by Joni Mitchell, performed by Keith Jarrett. For more, see writersaTworkpodcast.com. I'm your host, Jim Fusilli. Until next time, happy reading.